Okay, in this course we're going to be making a rather cool card game. As you can see, we can drag this paladin around and he can attack creatures, he can heal, he can attack more creatures, and he can die. So it's a pretty simple game, but it teaches you quite a lot. We're using phaser, we're using modern JavaScript, so ES6. So we're using things like classes, getters and setters, all cool stuff like that. This is more a practice course than a teaching course. Of course you will learn a lot if you create this game, but I'm just going to take you through how you would create a game like this pretty quickly. And so hopefully you'll get something for your portfolio and you'll learn something along the way. Okay, let's get up and running. We want to install Visual Studio Code. That's where we're going to be writing all our code. Go to code.visualstudio.com or just simply Google Visual Studio Code and make sure it says Visual Studio Code in the top left corner, and then you want to download and install Visual Studio Code. I'm on Windows, so download for Windows, but they have a Mac version and a Linux version as well, so you can download it for your relevant OS. Once that's downloaded, run the relevant installer and install Visual Studio Code. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is open VS Code, and then if we go to Terminal and New Terminal, and we're going to create a directory to put our game in. So I'm going to go to my D drive and I'm going to go into a folder I've already got called tutorials. Then in tutorials I'm going to make a directory and I'm simply going to call it card game. And then if I change directory into card game, like so, then I want to open this folder in Visual Studio Code. So a nice easy way of doing that is code-r and a full stop. So we're in our card game folder now, so we want to create an index.html file, which is going to be the main page for our game. Because we have Emmet installed, we can simply start typing in HTML, choose HTML:5 and hit enter. And that's a nice lazy way of getting us up and running with some HTML. I'm not going to be very creative with my game name. I'm just going to call it card game. And I'll put a H1 in here and call it card game, and then we're going to create a div which phaser will use to insert the canvas for our game. So we want to call it something that we remember the name of, so we'll give it an ID of phaser-game. And while we're here, we might as well kick off our main JavaScript module. So we are using modern JavaScript, so we want to use modules. So it's a type of module, and we're going to put all our JavaScript in a folder called JS. And again, I'm not going to be very creative, I'm just going to call it cardgame.js. So I'll hit Control S to save that. Now we actually want to bring in phaser as well. The easiest way to do that is use a CDN, Content Delivery Network. So if you open up your favorite browser, go to Google, and we can simply type into Google phaser 3 CDN, and this second link here is a list of CDNs for phaser, and the one we want is this one here. So if we just click on that, click copy, we don't need that anymore, and then we can bring phaser in by using that CDN. So script source, and then paste in our CDN, and that should be enough to bring in phaser. Now we actually need a server to run phaser properly on a local machine. And now the easiest way to get a local server running is to install live server in Visual Studio Code. So if you click on these blocks down here, this will show any extensions you got installed, and also gives you the ability to add other extensions. Now as you can see, I have live server already installed here. So you will need to go in here, type in live server, and you'll see it here at the top. If you just click on it, and then you will need to click on install. What that enables you to do is to right click on your index.html, and then you can simply click open with live server here. We can see our index.html page showing like so. So now we want to create this cardgame.js file. So we want to create a folder called JS, and then if we right click that folder and do new file, and we type in cardgame.js, and we want to create a config object. So we create an object by using these curly brackets like so, and in the object we want a property called width, and we're going to set that to 640. We want a height that we're going to set to 1024. We want a background color, which we will make a dull grey, so 33, 33, 33. Yep. Then we're gonna let phaser automatically choose the type of canvas we want. And if you remember rightly, we had a div which we called phaser-game. So we're going to use that div as our parent. And then we want to specify what scene that we want to run. But we'll make that blank for the moment. And then we simply do new phaser.game and pass it in our config object like so. So now if we take a look at our card game, we can see we now have a dark grey canvas that we can start building our game inside of. So while we're still in cardgame.js, let's pretend that we've created our main scene. We are going to call that, funnily enough, main scene.js. And down here we need to specify it also. So our game is only going to have one scene, so that's nice and simple. And that's all we need for this particular file. So let's now go away and create this main scene file. So we're going to create a file called mainscene.js, and this is going to be a class that we export so that the cardgame.js file can import it, and this inherits or extends the phaser.scene class, like so. And whenever we create a class, we need a constructor, and for the phaser scene class, we need to call super with the name of our scene, which is main scene. Now, phaser scenes have a few handy functions. The first function that we're going to use is called preload. And preload, as the name handily suggests, gets called just before the scene loads. And so this is the best place to load all your image files. So we haven't actually got any image files yet, but let's pretend that we do. So how you load an image is you just simply type in this dot load dot image, and then you specify what you want to call the image, which is we're going to have a card image, and we're going to load this from an assets folder, and it's going to be card.png. Okay, let's go through creating some assets. Now, my weapon of choice when creating assets like these is Figma. So if you go to figma.com, you can create an account for free, and you can start creating assets like these. So if I just go through how you would create a card like this in Figma, you can just click here, click on rectangle, and you can draw out a rectangle. Simple as that. Now this rectangle here is 182 by 256. So you can type in here to get the height and width exactly correct. And then to put this border around here, you simply click a plus next to stroke, and then you can increase the border like so. If you want to put this rounded edge on the corners, then you can just increase this field like so. If you want to get this nice gradient effect, then that's the fill of the rectangle, so you can click in here. This will just enable you to change the color, but if you want to add a gradient, you just click this plus here, and that will add a gradient like so. And if you want the same colors I've got here, that's like an orangey color like so. So we want a box in the top left corner where we want to put the value of our card. That will change depending on what type of card it is. Like a health potion will have how much that health potion will heal, and if it's a monster, that will be the health of the monster. So I've kept it a fairly generic flag. So again, you would simply go into rectangle, and you can draw out a rectangle like so. And again, add a stroke. Like that. Now you can edit this rectangle by double clicking on it. And I want to put in a node here so that I can get this indented effect. So if I click on pen and click there, then that's given me an extra node, and I can click back to move, and I can move that up like so. And then I want to change the fill color to a kind of dull orange like that. And if I double click again, it makes it a little bit easier for me to resize it, so I can make it a little bit bigger like that. and I don't want a black stroke for the flag. I want a kind of brown border. So if I click on stroke, I can change it here like that. Now, as you can see, I've also got a little bit of a drop shadow going on here, so that's very simple to add. I just click on the flag, click the plus next to effects, and you get it drop shadow, but it's going a little bit down. I actually want it to edit that, so if I put 4 in here, it'll make it like a more of a diagonal drop shadow going off to the right. And so if I want to export this as a PNG, it's very simple. We can group these together. So if you draw a box around all of this, and then if you simply hit Control G, that will group these items together, and we can rename this card. And then if we scroll down here, we have export here. We can click on that, and we simply click export card. So we want to make a similar card for the player, except that the card just wants to have a heart in the top left corner where we can put the player's health. We want to show or hide the armor depending whether they have any armor. So in this particular case, I'd want to hide the armor, and then I can export this card, and we would rename this player card. And if I bring the armor back, we can simply click on that and export that as armor. And so in a similar vein, we also want a button to restart our game. So create a restart button. Text is easy to add in Figma with by just selecting this T icon. Then you can just click and start typing, and you can select the font. I've got a press start to play font here, which I will show you how to get in a moment. So the other type of assets you will need are monster assets and player assets and things like potions. So you can get them from your favorite art website or artist, or you can create them yourselves, or what I've simply done for this tutorial is to go to opengameart.org, and a very popular tile set is this dungeon crawl tile set, and as you can see they have a very nice license. You can download the zip file here. Now once you've downloaded the file, just simply unzip it, and you'll have essentially more monsters than you'll know what to do with. But for our purposes they're a little small, so we want to scale them up a bit. So again we can use Figma to do this. So if we go back to Figma, so say we want to use this Death Knight, we can simply drag and drop into Figma like so. And as you can see, he's pretty small. He can come in as 32 by 32. But we want him to be 128 by 128. And so you just increase the width to 128, and then we can simply export him as a larger PNG. So we want to create an assets folder to put in all our game assets. So if we right click and choose new folder, and we will call this assets, it wants to not be in the JS folder but actually in the root. And then if we right click and reveal in File Explorer, and we want to drop all our assets that we create in Figma into here. So let me do that now. So these are the main assets that we're going to be using for the card game. So we have an armor icon, we have our card that we're going to use for monsters, healing potions, armor, etc. I've got an icon here that I'm going to be using for showing on the card when the player or the monster's dead, and then I've downloaded and upscaled a few monsters from the dungeon tile set that I showed you. We also have a healing potion here. These are all upscaled to 128 by 128. I've got a shield here as well, and I've got a restart button here, which is 240 by 82. So that should do for our main image assets. So the only thing else we need to do is actually create an asset for the text in our game. So I'll go through that next. So we're going to create our font with a program called Bitmap font generator. So if you go into Google and just search for BMFont, you should be able to find this page. Or just type this into your web browser's address bar. So what you'll want to do is download the 64-bit executable here, and when that's downloaded, just double click the executable and run it like so. So I'm using a font called Press Start to Play. So if in Google you type in Press Start to P font, the very top link should be a link to the Google font, and we can just click here to add this font, and then if we just download it like so, and then if we unzip the font and then go into the folder, what we can do is we can actually right click the font, and if we open it with the Windows font viewer, we can install it like so, which will enable us to use it in Figma for creating our restart button. And then we can also use this file to create our bitmap font. So if you go back to our bitmap font generator, click on options. If we've installed the font, it should actually be in here. Press start to play. Or we can actually click add font file and choose it this way, like so. And as you can see, that's loaded the font. Now from the font we just want a space, we want the numbers 0 to 9, so you can click and drag. We want these letters here and these letters here like so. So if we click on options again and click on export options, we want to make sure that our bit depth is set to 32 because we want a transparent background, and we want to make sure that our file format is set to XML, and we actually want a PNG texture. And then if we click OK to that, and then click on options again and save bitmap font as, and I'm just going to call it press start. So these are the two files that it created. I actually just want to rename this take the -0 off the end, and we can copy these two files now into our assets folder. So we've created all these lovely PNG assets here, and hopefully you've got them all in your assets folder now. So we need to load every single one of them with this .load.image. So you probably want to pause the video here and just type these lines in to make sure that they're all loaded inside the preload method. And then the final thing that we need to do is we need to load the Bitmap font. So we do this with this .load .bitmap font. And this is called press start. So this file here is pressstart.fnt. It's actually an XML file, but it exported with a .fnt, and that's absolutely fine. Bitmap font doesn't seem to care that the XML file has actually got a .fnt on the end, so that's happy. And so we now have all the assets that we're going to use inside our game loaded. Now the next method that we want to use is a method called create. So once the scene is loaded, the create method gets called, and so anything that we want to show in our scene we can create in the create method. So we actually want to create a card for our player. We're going to create an object from a class called card base, which we haven't created yet. So this will take a JavaScript object with some properties in. We're going to send it the scene. As you'll find in Phaser, that passing the scene around is kind of essential. We're going to send it an X coordinate, which we'll just make 0 for the moment. We're going to send it a Y coordinate, which will make 0 for the moment. Now we're going to send it the card background that we want to use, which we've got this asset here called player card. And we're actually using this name here. This is how we specify the image that we want to use. So that's player card. And then for the player, I'm using an image of a paladin. So we load that up here. So we've got that available to us. And the only other thing for the moment that we're going to pass in is a depth, which we want to make sure that our player card is on top of everything else. So we can give it a depth of 1, and everything else can be a depth of 0. That way the player card will be on top of all other things. And that will actually do for the moment, so we'll just hit Ctrl S to save. But of course we don't have this card base class yet, so let's fix that now. So we want to create our card base class, so let's right click in our JS folder and do new file, and we're going to call this cardbase.js. And so we will export this class so that it is available for us to use, and we are going to extend the phaser game objects container class. So phaser containers are super useful because they essentially are a collection of game objects, and all the game objects in a container will kind of move around with each other, and so it's perfect for creating a card that may have things like text on them and other images. That's why we want a container. So as per usual, in a class you want to have a constructor. It's the first thing that gets called when you instantiate a class. Instantiate an object from a class. So we're going to send it a JavaScript object, which we're calling data in this instance. And in data, we're going to have some properties, and we can pull these out very handily by using this technique, which is called destructuring assignment, or in this case, object destructuring. And so we're going to pass into cardbase the scene, an X and a Y, a name, which I don't think I set up, so I'll fix that in a second. The background of the card, the image we want to show on the card, which is our paladin, and the depth, which for the player is going to be 1. So if I just hop back to main scene, and yeah, let's pass in the name, and we're going to call this paladin. Okay, so we want to create some sprites now to show on our card. So we're going to create our background here, which is the card itself. So we create a new phaser sprite, we pass it the scene. It's the main sprite in the container, so of course it will be at 0, 0, and we're using the card image that we've passed in. So the next sprite is the actual image we're showing on the card, which in this particular case is a paladin. So again, we pass it the scene. Now the paladin wants to be positioned on the card somewhere, so we'll put it as 0, 0 for the moment, but we will probably need to adjust that. And then we're going to want to put the name on our card. So again, it's a paladin in this particular case, but on other cards it might be something like health potion, the monster name, ogre, etc. So this is our bitmap text. Again, we'll put it at 0, 0 for the moment, and our bitmap text, if you remember rightly, is called press start. We're showing the name that we're passing in, so in this particular case it's paladin. I'm going to have a font size of 16, and we want to align it in the center, so we can use align center. Now we need to pass to the container all this information via the super method. So we will pass it the scene, the X and the Y, and then a list of all these game objects that we want to add to this container. So that is the sprite card, the sprite image, and our text. And then we actually want to put all these items on this card base object just in case we need to get at them later. So let's do that now. And then we want to add this container to our scene. So we do that with the add method on our scene object. Like so. Now we want to go back to our main scene and import card base. So let's go up the top here and do import card base from card base, like so. Now let's see if that works. So if you go back to our index.html and we right click and do open with live server. So as you can see, we can see our paladin card, but it's at 0, 0, which is at the top left corner here, and that's the middle of the card is at 0, 0. So that's why we can't see it very well. So let's just change that now so we can see our card a little better. So if we come down here and we put it at 100, let's say 200 and 200. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's great. So we can see our card a little clearer now. But we need to fix the paladin text being on the bottom here, and I think we just want to move our paladin down a bit. So what we can do is we can move our paladin down a bit by just putting, say, 20 in here, which will move it down a touch. So yes, he's down a little bit now. And then let's move this text down to the bottom here. Now what we actually want to do is we want to make sure that no matter what's written inside this text, that it's centralized in the middle of the card here. So let's do that now. So what we can do is we can do a setter for our card name, which will take a parameter which is our new name. And we're gonna set our card name to new name. But because we've got a setter called card name, we're actually going to call our variable underscore card name. Now we set the bitmap text by using the text property. So this will be equal to underscore card name. Now for some of our names, they're going to be quite long, so we want to stop the text from being wider than the width of our card. So we can do this with max width. So we can say that the max width of our text is never going to be wider than our card. Now I also want the text to not be white but to be black, so we can set our tint to black. And seeing as we're aligning center, we want the center of our text to be the middle of the card, so that's why we want to set our X equal to our width divided by 2, and we want our text to be a fixed amount from the bottom of the card. So I've done a little bit of trial and error, and found that this hopefully should put our name right at the bottom of our card. Right, let's see how that looks. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so we have our player card showing, but we actually want it in the middle and down the bottom here. So let's fix that one first. So we can get to the width of our canvas with this .game.config.width divided by 2 because we want it in the middle, and then we want it just off the bottom, so we want to get back our height, and let's say something like that. Let's see how that's looking. So that's pretty good. Now we want to be able to drag this card, so we want to be able to click, hold and drag. So that's the next thing we'll do now. So we need to create a card draggable class. So let's do that. So if you right click, new file, card draggable.js. So we need to import our card base because we're going to extend the functionality of our base card and make it draggable. So, oops. So we need to export our class so that we can use it elsewhere. And this extends our base card. So the first thing we want to do is create a constructor which takes in our data object, and a new thing that we want to pass in to our draggable card is a function that gets called when we stop dragging the card. So we will pass that in. Then as per usual we have to call the super, and what we want to do is we want to always snap back to our original position. If we're just dragging and releasing into an empty space or not to a valid point, then we want to snap back to where we originally were, hence the idea of original X and original Y. Then we want to be able to stop the ability to drag this card, i.e. if the player dies, we don't want to be able to let the user drag the player card. We want to keep track of when we're dragging the card. That might come in handy. We want to keep track of this onDragEnd function that we're passing in. Now to be able to make this card interactive, we have to specify the size of this component. So this is the actual size of the card image that we're using. So that's pretty easy to set up. And then now we can say that this game object is now interactive, and then we need to say that this object is now draggable. So this is a phaser method called setDraggable, and we pass it the object we want to be draggable, like so. And then we can specify what happens when we're dragging by saying on drag we want to run this method. Use an arrow function here, and we're gonna not allow dragging if draggable is not set to true. Otherwise we will start implementing our dragging functionality. So we're going to set dragging to true. And what do we want to do when we're trying to drag the card around? Well, we actually want to set its position to both drag X and drag Y. Which is what phaser is sending us. And so that makes that pretty simple. Now while we're here, let's implement what happens when we stop dragging. So on drag end, we're going to set dragging to false. We're not dragging anymore. And then we want to call that on drag end method function that we're passing in, and we can send it the pointer and the game object that's being dragged around. Okay, so we want to, instead of using card base now, we can use card draggable, and let's see if this works. And for the moment we will just send it a blank on drag end, which we will fill out later. And we also need to change this to card draggable, like so. Now let's see if that works. So I've called that drabble, not draggable. So let's fix that. I go back, and now we can drag our card around, like so. Okay, so we've got this card draggable now, but we actually want a player card because we want to have some extra things on like health and armor. So let's do that now. So if we right click and do new file, and we will call this card player.js, and same as usual really, we will import this time from card draggable, and again we will create and export a class, this time called card player, and this extends our draggable card. And again, we will create a constructor. We will pass it in our data object. And what do we want to pull out of our data object? We're going to need scene. And we're going to want to pass it in health. So we can pull those two out of our data object. And as per normal, we have to call super with our data. Now we can create some text to show our health. And actually, we've got scene on card draggable, so you don't actually have to pull that out. So let's just forget about that. Now we're going to position these when we set them, so we don't have to worry about setting our X and Y here. And we're using our press start font, and we want to show our health. We're also going to have some text to show our maximum health, because we cannot ever exceed that. That can be exactly the same. We'll populate that with our initial health, but we'll have a slightly smaller text for that. Then we'll copy that again, and we want some text for our armor as well. That's not going to be small text, and we won't have an initial value of armor. It will always initially be 0. And we want to, if we do have some armor, we want to show our armor sprite. So let's create an armor sprite. And we have to pass that in our scene. And we will position this in the right spot. Now, for both of these bitmap text, we want to set the tint to 0 for our health and max health. And then we must remember to add these to our component. Now remember, our component is already added to the scene, so we don't have to do that, but we do have to add these new bitmap text and sprites to our component, and this is how we do it. Now we're going to position the health, max health and armor text when we set them. So let's set them here using our properties, which we will write in a minute. And let's create setters and getters for those properties. So first of all, our health property. So we want to pass it in our new health. And just like before, we'll use underscore health for the actual field itself. And then we'll set the text on the card to our health. And then we just want to make sure that we center our health text at this position. So we can get the width of the text and divide it by 2 to get the center of the text. So let's do get health now. So our getter, and that simply returns our health field. We'll do the same for max health. And we can be a little bit lazy here because we know that max health for this particular implementation we don't actually change it. You may want to do something similar like up here if you're gonna add functionality to change max health, but we won't bother in this particular build, and so we can keep it pretty simple. Now armor is a little bit more complicated because if armor is 0 we don't want to show our armor icon, that little shield, but if armor is non-zero then we're going to want to show the text and the armor shield. So this is what this bit of code is doing. So that's just centralizing the text depending on how large the armor is. So if it goes double digits it will stay inside the shield. And then this is simply saying if armor is 0 then we want to set the alpha to 0, i.e. make it invisible, otherwise we set it to 1, i.e. visible. And we do exactly the same with our sprite. In fact, I'll just copy that code there, like so. Now let's just do our getter for armor. And that should do for the moment. So let's use that in our main scene. So if we go to our main scene, and it's not card draggable anymore, it's card player. And we want to pass our card player some health now. Won't bother sending it armor because our armor starts at 0 and we're setting that in our constructor, so that should be fine. Well, let's go up here and player, player. So card draggable is just missing the .js on the end there, so we've just fixed that. But it does look like our text is not showing in the right place, so let's see why that is. Well, we didn't set our Y of our text health, so we can do that either up here. In fact, yes, let's do it up here. Don't have to set the X because we keep resetting that, but we do need to set our Y. So let's make this -100. Let's see if that... Okay, so that's good. So that puts our text in our heart. But the trouble is we're actually not seeing our max health. So let's try and work out why that is. So actually not setting our max health position down here, so we do need to set it up here. So let's set it to -20, -90, like so. I feel our 16 is a little bit low, so let's try and move it up a little bit. Let's try 104, it's a bit too high, 103, 102. So that looks a little bit better. So that's about it for the moment for our player card. I think that's looking pretty good. So let's now try and implement our other cards that we're going to show in this space up here.